Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome on this Wednesday, June 24th. It's the inaugural episode, the first episode of Deep Water MMA Podcast. I'm your host, Northrup, and I'm joined by my colleague, my partner in crime, Lucas Grandsire, all the way from France. How you doing, Lucas?
I'm doing well, man. Joining you today with the fresh fade, barbershop's opening back up. So, gotta look good for that first episode.
Yeah, I know. I got a nice little shape too. I wasn't able to get a haircut yet, but I do have one in a couple weeks. So
Soon, my man. It'll feel great and it'll be freeing.
Yeah, I mean, and you just touched on it too. I mean, we're I guess 7 total UFC cards so far into this whole thing. The quarantine since May 9th, I guess. Premier League soccer's back. I mean, sense of normalcy. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. It feels good. I mean, luckily MMA, we didn't get too long of a break. I was getting kind of scared with some of the interviews. Like, man, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but it feels good, man. Hopefully, basketball will be back sooner rather than later. And yeah, it's good to have some sports back.
Yeah, I feel like that almost helps you too, though. As a journalist, when there is less to talk about, you kind of have to dig a little deep in just that story kind of being right out there in front of you. I mean, there's a number of guys I can think off the top of my head where I was kind of just talking to them and you find out things that maybe you wouldn't have gotten to if you're interviewing them before a fight or something like that.
Well, it's a good point because during the break, I was like, all right, what kind of interviews can I do? And our guest for today, James Lynch, was like, maybe talk some prospects. So one of the guys I talked to ended up being Ramiz Brahimaj. So we got to do a get to know Ramiz interview and get signed by the UFC. So it was very beneficial for myself, for the prospects and everything. So it was good to, branch out, do some kind of different content.
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect segue too. You're talking about James, and obviously he's our guest today, but I mean, everyone listening today is going to be a first-time listener. This is the first episode. So what this show's kind of about is just young MMA journalists kind of talking to MMA journalists. We just want to kind of dive into that, find out why journalists got into this sport, because I was even talking to Lucas kind of off the air, but even someone I went to school for journalism, but a lot of my professors weren't, MMA guys. They were basketball, baseball, hockey, so MMA is still kind of that newer sport, and we want to kind of dive more into that side of it rather than just because between you and I mean, we both do quite a few fighter interviews a week, so it's kind of nice to kind of mix it up, talk to the other guys that are covering the sport.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for this first guest. Listen, he was my last guest on the MMA debate show. I felt kind of bad. It took so long. So, this one, we got him number one. We got him fast. So, got to make up for that.
All right, cool. So before we get James on, and it won't be much longer, we'll start the show just with a little rundown. We have James Lynch on, as we've mentioned, of The Score. He does a lot of great work for them, and it's going to be a pleasure talking to him. And after we talk to James for a little bit, we have kind of a friendly debate planned between James and our very own Lucas. And then me and Lucas kind of want to talk about a little more about UFC on ESPN 11. This past weekend, we obviously had the Emmett Burgos throwdown, Justin James debut knockout. How about Jim Miller too? He's still got it. So a lot of good things to talk about, and then a great card coming up this Saturday too with Dustin Poirier, Dan Hooker. I mean, that's a really good headliner, I believe. And I'm just excited to get going here.
For sure, let's do it.
All righty. So now let's bring our first guest of the show in here. It's Adam.
There we go.
And let's welcome our first. How you doing, James?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good.
Doing good, man.
It's kind of crazy too because I'm in the United States. We got James in Canada and Lucas in France too. I mean, we're really covering a lot of ground here today.
It's an international show. What can I say?
There you go.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me on the first episode. I'm honored. It's good to be here.
That's right. It's good to have you, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no thanks for coming on. One thing I got to say, James, too, is, I mean, Lucas always responds to my messages rather quickly. I don't know if there's anyone on this planet, though, that responds faster to someone than you. I mean, you're always
I'm always on Twitter, man. Yeah, it's a 24-hour business, so you gotta be on your toes. And I don't like leaving people hanging, right? I like to get back to them right away.
Yeah, for sure. And that's really what we want to talk about too. I mean, obviously we were talking about at the beginning of the show, why we kind of wanted to do this podcast, to talk to journalists. And that's why we wanted to have you on too, because I feel like you have such a unique kind of way of you do things too. With your YouTube channel too, James Lynch, you're opening up to a lot of different up and coming journalists, maybe people that have journalist backgrounds, maybe people that don't. but it's just like very like helpful in that way too. Like, what kind of made you start something like that? Like, what decided to say, hey, you know, I'm kind of like going to give back to some of these guys that maybe are looking to come up?
Well, I think part of it too is that, you know, being at the Score, I have all my contests exclusive to their channel. So I wanted to still have a way to keep my channel going. I had, you know, 10,000 subscribers. I couldn't do any interviews or live chats like this, but I figured I get asked a lot of questions, a lot. You know, people ask me, how do I get into the sport? How do I record interviews? So rather than me having to explain it every single time over and over again, I figured I'd just make a video and just send them the link, and it's a million times easier. And I mean, let's be honest, as you guys know, I mean, I make ad revenue off that as well. So I figure if I'm going to, you know, spend my time helping someone else, I don't mind making a few extra bucks. Not a lot, obviously, but you know, I'm more than happy to help out and answer a lot of questions that just aren't out there. I mean, there's no blueprint on how to be a journalist in this industry. It's very wild, wild west to a certain degree. So I know you guys were sort of talking about earlier about you know, backgrounds and everything. Like, I have a journalism degree, or I have a communications degree and a broadcast journalism diploma as well. But like, there's a lot of people covering the sport who don't have that. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm glad you guys are doing this show, because I don't think we talk enough about the sort of the media side of the industry. And there's a lot of opinions on it. I know a lot of people don't like the media, and they, you know, and those who do, but it's one of those things where I'm happy to bring some clarity there, just based off from my own experiences. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I can help out as much as I can.
But listen, just to jump in here, you mentioned the helping people and stuff. An example, I talked to Sean O'Malley not too long ago, and the amount of Instagram DMs I got from guys, hey, I'm going to start this shitty podcast. Can you hook me up with Sean O'Malley? You know, requests like that, where it's like, dude, I don't know who you are, man. One guy was like, I barely speak English. You know, we're in Ecuador. Can you bring him on? And, you know, I'm like, listen, I'm trying to be nice. I'm trying to help you as much as I can. But there's some requests like, I can't do anything for you. How often do you get requests like that? I assume as nice as you are, you got to like pull back sometimes.
I try and be polite. I mean, again, there aren't any, like, there's no written rules on like what to do or how to go about getting guests or how to go about things as well. I had someone recently message me asking if they could get a job at the Score because they're an amazing personality and all this stuff. And they had only done 2 episodes. They did like, I think they did a podcast. I think it was like an Instagram podcast or something with Laura Sanko and Gilbert Burns. And they were like, they already want to get like this full-time job. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. Like, you gotta build your brand. You gotta, you know, work your way up. So I politely said, like, look, like, you know, we're not hiring at the moment. And also, you know, you got to build a brand for yourself. Like, I don't even know who you are. Like, I should know who you are. I pay attention to pretty much everyone and all their content. So there's that. And then the guy proceeds to go on and start talking about how, you know, all these other sites are doing it wrong and all that. And I'm like, don't go that route, dude. You haven't even got a paid job yet. Like, you're already burning bridges here. I said, like, don't go about that attitude. And then he wanted to compare it to Barstool. He's like, well, that's how Barstool is. You know, they trash every other media outlet there. And I'm like, yeah, but Barstool's good. They like actually got to a point where they're able to say stuff like that, right? Yeah. Where like this guy's acting like he's already like established. And I'm just like, dude, like, don't take that attitude. Like, you know, you want to be open to learning. You want to be open to building your craft. But again, I try and point people in the right direction. I think that's sort of the big thing is like, you know, telling people like, this is how it works. Like, you got to start off here and work your way up, and then you'll get the paid gigs, and you got to be at it. I mean, it's not just like doing one podcast a month and then expecting to get, you know, people to come out and hire you. Like, you have to, it's a tough industry. It's very tough to make it in this industry. Even, you know, even as a freelancer, it's very tough to find paid opportunities.
And like when you were saying too, like when, you know, you got hired by the Score and your channel kind of went into like a transition into more of these type of videos too, like what was the response right away from that audience?
Well, I told people right off the bat that, look, I can't do content on here anymore. I made like an official video and let people sort of know. And even before I made that transition, I still did videos like that anyways. I would do stuff that wasn't necessarily like related to interviews or opinion stuff or whatever. I just put it out there because, like I said, I get a lot of requests. So, you know, it's easier for me to do a video and help people out that way than having to write out like, hey, this is what you got to do to record a Skype interview. Like, it's way easier to just send a video. A tutorial and that's sort of how I went. And yeah, I mean, some people complain, but look, there's nothing I can do. I mean, I have an opportunity I had to take, and you know, full-time opportunities don't come up often in this industry.
Well, speaking of that opportunity, you know, I had something not similar in the sense of the YouTube channel, like with SureDog, where basically it's like for 5 months, I'm not posting anything on my YouTube channel, and I didn't have a lot of subscribers, but I lost a good chunk of them at the same time. How was it for you though? Did you have to sort of think about that mentally, like, you know, 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, that's quite something. Did you have a hesitation like, maybe I want to keep it going, maybe do something else? Or was it just, look, full-time, that's the dream, let's do it?
No, they actually wanted to take over my channel, and I said no, because in the event if something happened, at least I still have that channel with 10,000 subscribers. It's not like
Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd rather start from scratch, and it worked out. I mean, we got 23,000 subscribers in more than a year. I mean, I'm happy with that number. So I knew at the end of the day, if people liked the content I was doing, they would follow me. So it wouldn't really matter. I think of myself as a brand and a business as opposed to, like someone working for an outlet type thing. So I sort of knew things would be fine, and it was a seamless transition. I mean, my audience, especially for my podcast, they followed me over, and it was fine. It was just like this channel instead of this one. It was pretty simple.
And I know you've kind of talked about this like on your YouTube channel before a little bit as far as like your background, but like when you were coming up and like trying to get into the business too, and there wasn't like a YouTube channel where you could kind of go and like get tips like that, like who were some of those people that maybe like inspired you to kind of maybe go that route?
Well, to be honest, I was working. So the first like paid gig I ever got in MMA was working at MMA Oddsbreaker, an outlet that I was working until basically I got hired at the Score, and it was one of those things where I was doing interviews. I had like an audio podcast called The Parting Shot. It ended up being a video podcast later, but I was transcribing all these interviews. Something Lucas and I have talked about. Like I hate transcribing interviews, so does Lucas. But I always wanted to be a broadcaster. Like even before I got into MMA, I wanted to actually be a hockey reporter because that's what I grew up watching was hockey, and stereotypical Canadian, right? So so for me it was I always wanted to be on camera. And then when I got to MMA Oddsbreaker, I was transcribing interviews, and I was like, there's got to be a way I can do like on camera stuff. So Frank Trigg at the time was actually working for MMA Oddsbreaker and doing basically what I'm doing now, which is video interviews. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I could probably do it as well. But because Frank was interviewing some of the bigger names, I told the site owner Nick, I said, look, like, would you be interested if I could get you some fighters that maybe Frank isn't getting, or get some prospects? And I just sort of had the attitude that, and at the time, there wasn't a lot of people doing video interviews with prospects. So I kind of lucked out with that because like it ended up working out well, because obviously a lot of the prospects that I interviewed are now in the UFC, like Lucas was talking about off the top there. So that was sort of my goal. And I mean, there were prospects. I mean, I look back at how many interviews I did. I mean, there's a handful of prospects, probably more than a handful, that never panned out, that never amounted to anything. But at least I got that experience and I got the reps in. And the other bonus with doing prospect interviews is that, I could work on my craft. Like I wouldn't screw up if I was talking to like a Max Holloway or something. No one would remember that. It would be like you talk to some guy from Shamrock FC, big deal, right? So for me, it was more about getting the reps in, being more comfortable, and it just sort of evolved from there. And that's sort of where I really focused on the video interviews, because look, I'm not going to be like a Chuck Mendenhall and write like long form features. Like that's not my style. I've never, I don't want to learn how to do that now. It's not my bread and butter. I'd rather be on camera and do the broadcasting thing. So I just doubled down on that and ran with it, and luckily it all worked out.
And how have you seen like MMA, like journalism, but specifically MMA journalism, like change throughout the years?
Well, I'd say that there's a lot more people doing video interviews now. I think when I started, it was Frank Trigg and Karen Bryan, and that was it. And now everyone's doing it. Like I see, like I literally, if you look on my channel, like, well, you can't see, but I subscribe to like 200 YouTube channels. Like I'll watch everybody's stuff. I watch your stuff, Connor, watch your stuff, Lucas, all the time. Like the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I go through my feed and see who's doing what. And if there's something interesting to me, I even subscribe to like prediction guys just because I want to see how they're producing content. I think you can learn a bit from everyone. So that's always been my mentality. I just consume as much content as I can. And I'd say things have changed in terms of, I think there's sort of been a shift, right? Like I remember when I first started really getting into this like full-time as far as freelancing goes, we're talking like 2013. I mean, you had, the landscape was different, right? Ariel Helwani was at MMA Fighting, and they had, obviously him, and Mark came over later and from Fox Sports, and they had Chiapetta and everyone else. And like, you sort of had this older guard, and now we're seeing these newcomers come through and finding positions like Mike Heck, like Nolan King and Farah and all these other people that are doing a tremendous job, but it's just sort of, we're seeing a shift right now. Like it's crazy to me that guys like Chuck and Josh Gross are out of work right now. These are two of the best in the business, but it's the reality of what people want to consume in terms of what they want to watch. Like from what I've seen, it's, people want the big names, obviously, like you want big name interviews, you want breaking news. That's always going to be something valuable. And the other thing is big interviews as well. So, I mean, I can't tell you, like the sign of a good interview is seeing it get picked up by other outlets. And I think that's what the goal of a lot of us is to get that interview that's interesting and get it so everyone's picking it up and getting known, and just thinking of yourself as a brand. I think that's a really important thing.
So speaking of the interviews, like the prospects and things like that, one thing, when I worked for MMA World, the YouTube channel, I was giving them all these interviews, and it got to a point where it's like, if they're not this huge name that's going to get us, 100,000 clicks, we don't want it. But so in your case, you're talking to these prospects where sometimes if they don't even share it, it might not necessarily get the clicks. Has that gotten you issues in your career? Like have people try to tell you like, maybe we don't want the prospects or something like that?
Luckily, with the outlets I worked for when I was a freelancer, we sort of determined that, hey, I would only do prospects for this outlet. Like when I worked for Flow Combat, they wanted prospects that were competing on their cards, so it made sense. And yeah, the views weren't great, but I always explain to them that it's about building those relationships. Like there was a handful of Contender Series fighters that I interviewed last year at the Score, and obviously they weren't happy that the views weren't good. But I said, look, guys, like,
it's an investment.
These are fighters that could get signed to the UFC. Like Hannah Goldie's a good example. Like I remember interviewing her before Contender Series. She won. She ended up getting the call. I ended up getting an interview with her right away. It did quite well on the channel because not many people interviewed her before her UFC debut. So it's an investment to a certain degree as well. One way I've sort of gotten around that now with the podcast that I do is I just won't post every single interview. Like you'll notice on our Score channel, like every video is over 1,000 views, and the reason that is because I know what people want to watch. So if I want to interview like a Brendan Allen, which if I'm lucky, maybe 200, 300 views, maybe, if I'm like if I'm lucky, it might get close to 1,000. But what I do is I put it in one video, and that way people can still watch the interview, but it's not impacting the overall views because I'll put Brendan Allen with an Alex Volkanovski and the views will still be very high. So that's sort of been my strategy, at least now. But if I was at another outlet, I would look at other options like that because really you want your views to be good. And, obviously you make more money with more views.
So let me ask you this about the podcast, because, I try to watch it as much as I can. Got to support, friends in the industry. But how much editing goes into that? Like, as a video guy, I think about that. Like, do you edit each individual interview, put them all together once it's done? Or is this just one long 3-hour kind of thing that you edit all at once?
No, what I do is as soon as I do the interview, I edit it, I export it, and then once I'm putting everything together at the end, I just take that exported file and put it in the in the timeline. It's just way easier to do. Yeah. I never want, like I was told for years. I mean, even before I went full time, like with one outlet, I was told for years, like, why don't you do a show like Submission Radio and do like I think you even mentioned it to me. You were like, hey, why don't you do like a full show or whatever? Yeah. And that was the reason why I didn't want to edit that much. I thought it was a waste of time. I'd rather just get it out there. But I do see the value of it now, especially for if let's say you don't want to sit through and watch a long video thing. Let's say you want it as a podcast. We do have the audio option available too. So if you're around, you can obviously go and check that out too. So it's so now it's honestly not that bad. Like I put all my exported videos in a timeline, and then I just put them on for the podcast, and it's fine. I mean, the export time takes a bit and upload takes a while, but it's totally worth it.
Yeah. And another question too, just like obviously as a reporter too, like you are remote and you're doing these videos anyway, but like with the pandemic and everything that was going on, like did that change a lot of like your like daily things as far as like covering the sport?
Not really. I would find different fighters to interview. I would interview sort of, like UFC veterans or older fighters, or even when there were no fights going on, like I'd find just different angles to take with, certain fighters. So it wasn't too bad. And actually, if anything, I was busier because they wanted me to do a little bit more writing on the Score because obviously, this is a good time to go back and look at like, top 10 lists and things of that nature. So that's pretty much what I did for a while there. And now things are sort of back to normal where we are talking about fights. So no, I've been pretty lucky. Like I haven't really been impacted at all. Like it's been pretty smooth sailing from here on out.
All right. Well, after that conversation too, I mean, let's kind of move into a little bit of a friendly debate here. Emphasis on friendly. I'll be the curator, and we'll have 3 questions. And James and Lucas, you'll both have 2 minutes each to kind of make your case. So obviously, this week on UFC on ESPN 11, one of the biggest talks was that first fight, and and not really about the winner either, but with Max Rohskopf too, and with Robert Drysdale and all that, and he obviously Drysdale kind of talked about it in a video. I think it was on either Sunday or Monday, kind of talking about kind of what he thought. But what was Drysdale in the wrong? For Max, kind of pushing Max, I guess, to answer that bell. And we'll start with James since you're the guest.
Oh, I appreciate that. So, I mean, it's not a simple yes or no question. Was Robert Drysdale right to tell his fighter to continue? He was, but after like the 5th time, no, he wasn't. I mean, you got to listen to your fighter at a certain point. Obviously your job as a coach is to motivate your fighter. Sometimes mentally the fighter's not there. We've seen examples of that where, certain fighters are maybe getting defeated, maybe personally, maybe they're like, you don't know. So the coach's job is to put the fighter in the best position to succeed. And sometimes that might be a mental block. So I do sympathize with Robert Drysdale. Like I'm not a coach. I've never been in that situation, so I can't really comment to that degree as far as like what goes through his head. But just knowing coaches as much as I do, their job is to, motivate the fighter and give them advice and push them past their limits. So to a certain degree, I agree there. But no, he's wrong in the sense that after like the 5th time or whatever it was, yeah, call it off. The guy doesn't want to fight. Like, what if mentally, he's putting himself in danger if he's not mentally there, right? Like it's one of those things where you really have to be in tune with it. So I say it's more a maybe than anything, I think, because I do think that Robert was doing his job, but I also think after a certain point, you got to listen to your fighter and do what's best for him. And let's not forget, guys, Max only had 5 fights heading into this one. It was a better fit for him to be on Contender Series, I think, than being in the UFC. And I couldn't believe that he was the betting favorite heading into the fight when Austin Hubbard had way more fights than he did. So I think that's something to sort of make note of as well, that I think the UFC, they're kind of getting in the bad habit of just grabbing local guys. Like even this weekend, we got Jillian Robertson fighting Sean Woodson. Like Rosa just lost like a bunch of times brutally in the UFC, and you're bringing him back because he's a local guy. Like they got to do something better about that, in my opinion. I don't know what that would be, but yeah, in general, to answer your question, I'd say it's more of a maybe than a yes or a no.
One follow-up to that too, before you go, Lucas, is just you talk about like Julian Erosa too, but do you think that's happening more now too because like of the pandemic and everything? They could only pull a certain amount of guys because they didn't have the international kind of pool to take guys from.
Absolutely. And obviously travel's been a bit of a challenge too. Like Kyle Nelson, the reason he couldn't fight this weekend is because he couldn't get a visa to compete. He lives in Canada like me. Like I can't go to the US right now. I'm banned, just because of the COVID travel restrictions. So that's one of those things to sort of keep in mind as well. But yeah, I think for them, it's convenient, but I think they got to figure out a way to like, I don't know what it would be like. Maybe have some fighters on standby, get them to hang out in Vegas. I guess financially that would be tough for them, but I would think you got to get more established guys to bring up, I would think, and not just grab like Gina Mazzani is sort of the same situation as Rosa. Like she won 1 fight and then she has to come back in and fight Julia Avila, who's like a killer at bantamweight. That's a tall task. So if I've sort of talked about this already, like I think Woodson's going to win that fight just because I know Rosa's more of a lightweight than a featherweight, but I just think it's another case of a guy that isn't ready. He fought in the UFC, but clearly he's not at that level. If he's lost the way he has, I don't think he picked up a single win when he was there the first time. So yeah, I think it's obviously a convenient thing for the UFC.
Yeah. So for Max coming off of the stool, I mean, listen, the coach's heart's in the right place, right? Like, listen, it could be embarrassing for him if he's known as the quitter and, you got to motivate your guy and all that stuff. Like, I like where your head's at, but listen, when you've got a guy practically crying on his knees, having to beg the referee to stop the fight, having to beg his coach, like at this point you have an issue. I get what he was saying. Like, listen, I want my fighter to be embarrassed, but if anything, you ended up embarrassing your fighter by making him practically beg you. I mean, they counted 9 times. He's talking about, I want to quit. I want to quit. Listen, he says, I want to quit the first time. If the coach had been like, all right, we're done. Cool. Okay. That's a little bit, like, come on, man. Like maybe he just said that, like, but listen, like James said, by the 5th time, even by the 3rd time, I mean, there's a point where you look at that and you're like, all right, man, damn, like how many times he got to ask you before you stop it? I think, a good example of the fighter being done, the coach calling it is Nate Marquardt against Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is also that Nate was a veteran too. So when you have a veteran tell you I'm done, you're like, all right, this guy's been around forever. He knows. So the fact that he was only 5-0 in his career would probably mean that as a coach, he's like, nah, you know what? He needs that extra push. But at some point, it's not even a push anymore. It's a shove. I mean, you're literally trying to throw him out there. I mean, his head was in the right place. But for me, it's like you just turned it into a big story when it really shouldn't have been. Normally, it would have been, all right, corner stoppage. People would have been like talking about it a little bit, like, oh, maybe Anthony Smith, blah, blah, blah. But you just turned it into a huge story for your fighter when it didn't have to be like that. And we're at that point where Max is talking about potentially, I guess, retiring, or maybe he doesn't want to fight anymore. Like, honestly, his coach tried to do the right thing, but instead it just blew up into the situation that it didn't have to turn into, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I like to add to that too, though, is like, and I didn't notice it initially either. I had watched it a second time too, but at the end too, when, I mean, they're literally, everyone's kind of coming out of the cage and it looks like he's about to come back out and he's still saying no. Drysdale does say to the doctor, like, one final time, like, yeah, no, like he wants to stop. So like part of me kind of did like agree with Drysdale a little bit, just because I'm like, all right, he did push that guy, but like when it all kind of came to the end and like he was about to go back out, like he was with his fighter at that moment. I mean, that's at least the way I saw it at the end.
And one other thing I'll just add, I mean, maybe this is a trend that's going to be changing. I mean, we just had a situation like a month ago with Anthony Smith and Glover Teixeira where the coach didn't step in. Anthony's persevering. Anthony still feels like it was the right call. But I mean, any average person watching the fight, even if you are a fighter, I think you got to know he's taking too much damage and he could be taking years off his career. So I think this might actually be a positive thing. I know Max obviously isn't happy about the abuse he's taken. As far as I know, he's deactivated his Twitter and his Instagram account, which sucks because there's a lot of idiots out there who've never been in a fist fight. And now they want to, put on their insecurities by telling this guy that he quit, right? Because they're not fighters. But like, I think, maybe this is a trend going forward that we'll see younger fighters recognize that, look, it's not worth it. I might be taking you. Like, I don't even know the reason why he didn't want to continue. He didn't really say, but I mean, was it that he took too much damage? Was he tired? Was he like, what is it? If he feels he's putting himself in danger, I think that's a good sign to see that fighters are kind of wising up a little bit and not being that sort of that macho role when they got to look out for their career long-term.
And let me throw this out there. I know everybody's kind of comparing Anthony Smith, asking him what he thinks and stuff. It's two different situations, though.
Yeah.
Anthony Smith is getting pounded, teeth are falling out, and he told his corner, I mean, I think his entire career, like, if you stop that fight, you're going home all by yourself. There's a difference between asking the corner to step in all by themselves, like, all right, we got to think about Anthony Smith first. And your fighter is right there on the stool looking down and everything, telling you he's done. For me, there's a difference in those two situations. And by, the fifth done, it's a completely different situation than Anthony Smith losing his teeth, but he still wants to continue. That's just my 2 cents on that one.
No, you're absolutely right. It was sort of more so comparing it to the fact that, I mean, that's sort of the old school fighter mentality is what Smith displayed in that. Whereas I think Rohskopf is hopefully, these fighters are kind of, being a little bit more in tune to what's going on and looking sort of long-term here. Cause you don't have a situation where someone's taken too much damage. I'm always remembered of, Dan Lozon, Joe Lozon's brother, came into the UFC really young, just never got a good career because he took so much damage so early on in his career. He never really panned out. And of course he retired early. So you don't want to see a situation like that where a guy's rushed a little bit too soon.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because Jillian Robertson getting signed, well, what was he kind of known for in the UFC? He was getting highlight reeled by everybody. So he's kind of an example of, one of those guys they keep trying to bring back, and he's taking so much damage at this point that I don't know how much further he can take off. And Kay Hansen, the same thing. She's younger than I am. Like, it's weird for me that there's a fighter younger
that's
than me.
That's when it's bad.
Yeah, it's like, hold on, man. Like, you're younger than me. No, that's not right. And she's fighting in the equivalent of what would have been a title fight in Invicta. So it's kind of all over the place trying to figure out these prospects at the same time.
Maybe the Hansen thing, I wonder if they're kind of doing like a Macy Barber thing where they feel like she's really that good. So they're going to give her the former Invicta champ. And if she beats her, then they'll give her a push because obviously Macy's been derailed a little bit losing to Roxanne. So maybe that's their thinking. But yeah, I agree with you. 20 years old, like, you should probably get a few more fights in there. I know she has, I forget how many fights total she has. I think it's over 10, but in general, like, it doesn't hurt to take a little bit longer to get to the UFC. It's just that the UFC, again, they need fight. This is the one thing we got to remember. No matter what, the UFC needs to put on fights because they have a deal with ESPN. They have to fill up those cards. So rather than canceling the Kyle Nelson and Sean Woodson fight or rebooking it, which would make sense because it was a visa issue, they're just putting on the card instead because they have an obligation, which, it kind of makes the whole sport look like a bit of like a sausage factory in that sense where they got to just keep pumping out everything no matter what.
But listen, I don't want to finish on a negative note for the UFC, so I do have to say the signing of Ramiz Brahimaj coming out of Fortis. Obviously, I talked to him, so I know him pretty well. But for me, that was a great signing. I know he was supposed to be at UFC London, but listen, great signing right there. Like, some of the prospects, though, are UFC ready, and there's definitely some good signings in there.
Yeah, and he's battle tested as well. I haven't seen a ton of footage on him, but if you look at his record, he's fought, good competition on the regional scene. That's what you want to see. You don't want to see someone who's fought cans and then they get to the UFC and it's 0-2 and you're out of there, right? You want to see guys that have longevity in there.
Exactly.
For sure. And then our next topic, too, is also on UFC on ESPN 11. It was the Curtis Blaydes fight. Obviously, Dana White had, some negative things to say about the performance. But, I feel like a lot of people are kind of talking about that. I want to go more into, what's kind of next for Blaydes because, he obviously has the 2 losses to Francis Ngannou, who a lot of people would say would get the winner of Miocic and Cormier if neither of them retire. And then, obviously, if they both retire, that is a whole nother option for Blaydes. But we'll start with Lucas on this one. Who makes the most sense to fight Blaydes next after his win on Saturday?
I have no clue. How do you want me to matchmake that? Have you seen the rankings? It's like, and I talked to Curtis Blaydes, who was like maybe Derek Lewis, but they're not going to give me that fight. It's what, Derek Lewis or Jairzinho. And either one, stylistically, I don't want to see that fight. And they're dangerous and they do nothing for Curtis Blaydes. Realistically, if I had to give him a fight next, sit out, take your time, get healthy. We saw him come in a little bit heavier than usual. Get your weight right, get your body right, recover from any injuries, and just wait. It's going to be a long wait because he told me too, Francis Ngannou, he feels is ahead of him, rightfully so. That's true. So listen, let the heavyweights figure out their title situation. Let Francis Ngannou figure it out himself. And listen, maybe it's a good thing too, because say Miocic loses to Cormier retires, vacant title fight. The heavily anticipated Ngannou versus Blaydes 3 for the third time. This time it's personal. We finally, get the trilogy, and maybe he steps in. But aside from potentially sitting out and waiting for the title, there's no other fight that makes sense. I don't see why you would take a fight, at this point, considering how close you are to the title.
And James?
And I agree with Lucas in the sense that wait it out, but he's got to get another fight in there. And I think the Lewis fight makes the most sense. I've heard a lot of people, not just yourself, Lucas, mention that it seems like the UFC wants to put Derek Lewis in a title shot again. He's obviously a popular guy or whatever, but I still think that Blaydes fight is kind of interesting as well, because I think people are underestimating Lewis's, knockout power. I mean, other than Ngannou, I think Lewis probably has some of the best knockout power in that division. So can Curtis Blaydes take a Derek Lewis shot? I mean, 9 times out of 10, if you look at the fight on paper, Blaydes would win with his wrestling. He would take him down. He would outmuscle him, whatever. But that's sort of the last big name in that division that Curtis hasn't fought. He's fought everyone else, right? He's not going to fight Overeem because Overeem's his teammate now. And, that I know that rematch wasn't that long ago. But I see him, if Oleinik and, Lewis, if whoever wins that fight, I would think he fights the winner. I know he's beat Oleinik in the past. Maybe you do that rematch just to keep him active. The Rosenstruik fight as well. Like if Rosenstruik beats JDS, then yeah, you could do that as well. But I think he'll fight again. And I think he knows he's just kind of in this, what used to be called the Rich Franklin zone back in the day when he lost Anderson Silva twice. Blaydes is sort of in that same position, and we'll see what happens at the top. I mean, could Stipe and DC both retire? That could be a possibility. Could Ngannou, could he lose to both of them? Like, a lot's going to sort of depend on what happens with the heavyweight title, or what happens if, let's say, Stipe's injured or DC's injured or something and Ngannou steps in. There could be that scenario as well too. So he'll be chilling out for a while, but definitely not going to be fighting for a title next. I think that he's got to fight one more. I mean, had he gone in there and demolished Volkov and finished him in like the second round, then maybe we can have that conversation. But winning a decision, won't cut it as far as getting a title shot. So he's got to wait around and, like I said, take another fight.
Imagine that scenario too. If like one of those guys like unfortunately did get hurt too, and like Ngannou steps in, because then like if you're Cormier too, it's like well then you're just waiting longer. Then like do you even get like Stipe again? You don't have, then you lose that trilogy fight. I mean that would be it. It is going to be really interesting to see how it kind of does all play out.
Yeah, no, it will. So that's why if I'm Blaydes, I wait around a little bit, but I also see what the options are. Like if Oleinik wins and JDS wins, that's probably like the worst scenario for him. Like I think out of all the opponents, Lewis is sort of I don't know why they booked that fight before the Blaydes and Volkov matchup that happened last Saturday. They booked that on like a Wednesday. Why not wait to see what happened with Blaydes and Volkov? Like I think Lewis and Blaydes makes way more sense than Oleinik. Oleinik can fight Overeem or fight I guess he fought Overeem recently, but Oleinik could fight someone else. And then you do, Blaydes and Lewis. That's like a big matchup. Like as far as name value, that's a big matchup they could still do. That could headline a card. And it's like the one name Blaydes hasn't fought other than Rosenstruik, but Lewis is a bigger name. So I think that's sort of what they should be looking at.
Yeah. And then our third and final topic as well. I mean, we're a couple of weeks now away from Fight Island, which, I mean, when it first came out, it seemed like it was just this like mysterious thing. And if it would ever come to, it just seemed kind of crazy. But the UFC, we know it's Yas Island now. We know it's in Abu Dhabi. I mean, they were there in September, I believe. And like, at this point, they're continuing to promote it as Fight Island. They obviously have like the T-shirts but like that's classic UFC too. They were doing the mask too, like when the pandemic like started and everything. But even when they announced like these 4 cards too for Abu Dhabi, I mean they still had the Fight Island poster with like the water behind the cage and everything. And I thought this weekend was just like another level of that, where they're promoting it, or they kind of ran a promo, but like Max Holloway's on the beach. Volkanovski's on the beach. I mean, you could see that Aldo was in Brazil, but I mean, like still, like he was on the beach too. So they're still kind of like selling this persona. And so my question is, should the UFC continue to promote Yas Island as Fight Island, or is kind of enough now?
They should promote it as Fight Island. I think it's easier to remember. If you say Yas Island, what average fan is going to even know what that means? Fight Island makes way more sense. It's practical. It's not the first time the UFC's kind of bended things in the past, right? It's how they, it's like when they refer to a fighter that comes over from Bellator as, they fought in another organization. It's no different than that, right? Like the UFC's in the business of selling tickets and selling fights. So it's just easier to say Fight Island. I don't have an issue with it. Technically, it is on an island. It's not like Bodog, Costa Rica, which if you guys haven't seen that card, go check that out. That's badass, where they're literally fighting on a beach in a ring. You can see everyone there, ring card girls and their bikinis and stuff. It was pretty cool. So it's not going to be like that, but no, I think Fight Island works, and it's something different, right? That's going to hopefully get new fans in.
I mean, listen, what is the UFC famous for? What is Dana White famous for? Sticking to your guns, damn it. UFC Fight Island. Did you think they were going to stop calling it Fight Island? It is Fight Island until it's over. It will be Fight Island forever. Listen, everybody's talking about their degrees in journalism and stuff. Could I just plug out there? I'll be getting in about 2 weeks a bachelor's degree in marketing. Just marketing wise, you have to stick with UFC Fight Island. I mean, listen, great T-shirts. It sounds cool. I mean, I talked to a few fighters on it. Obviously, I talked to Justin Taffa. Maybe talking to an island person about fighting on an island wasn't the right thing because, he was like, well, I don't really give a fuck. I'm from the islands. All right, that's fair. But listen, fighters don't seem to have a problem with it. Fans seem to love it. It seems really the media is the only one that likes to throw the little asterisks and correct you on where exactly it is. Listen, stick with it, man. Fans are going to remember, what is Fight Island? Are they fighting on a beach? Sure. So, for me, you have to stick with it. Marketing-wise, it's really great. It sounds good. It may not be accurate, but you have to stick with it, in my opinion.
I think I agree with that too, because I have some friends that aren't so into the sport, but even them were like, oh, the pay-per-views are too expensive. But then they're talking about it, and they're like, but I will pay for Fight Island because they're like, I just want to see that. So it's like a lot of them, like James was saying, they don't know what Yas Island is. So to them, it is Fight Island.
Exactly. There you go. It's the UFC's in the business of selling tickets, whatever means possible. So, and sorry, when I say tickets, I mean, obviously watching on TV, there are no crowds in there, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, now that's it for our topics, James. I mean, if you have the time, I know you have something around 4 o'clock. I mean, if you want to stay, you're more than welcome.
Stick around as long as I can before 4. It's all good with me.
All right. Sounds good. So I just wanted to talk about a couple more things from this past weekend too. We obviously talked about Blaydes and a lot of some of the other things that happened. But for you guys, what were some of your standout, maybe your biggest takeaways from this past Saturday?
On the card, I mean, obviously the sort of the topic of discussion was Dana White going after Curtis Blaydes and saying he talked all the smack. I don't really understand that. Like, other than the tweet, I believe he said something in the CBS interview with Brian Campbell, but I mean, Blaydes is not a guy to like talk a lot of trash. Like, I know he's called himself the heel or whatever, but I thought Dana was a little unfair about that, saying that if you talk this much smack and then you have that type of performance, first off, Volkov's only been finished once in the UFC, and it was by Derek Lewis at the very last minute. So to say that he's like an easy guy to finish is ridiculous. And two, like, Curtis had a good game plan. He took him down. He tried to finish him, but Volkov's 6'7". Like, he's not an easy guy to finish, especially trying to submit him or whatever. So I thought that was like a big takeaway as well. Obviously, the other fight on the card, Emmett and Burgos, just phenomenal fight. Josh Emmett continuing to prove why he's the dark horse at 145. That was a big win for him. Shane Burgos got a granite chin. I think that's one of those fights that even though Burgos lost, his stock went up. I think people saw how durable he is. And, I think it was a great card. I mean, there was a lot of upsets. You always like seeing that on a card where, it's not as predictable as everyone thinks. And, I thought overall was one of their better cards. Maybe not the strongest on paper, but I thought it delivered quite well.
Yeah. Do you think that Blaydes fight too might have from Dana too, just like receive more criticism because it did follow that Burgos and Emmett fight? Because in this like day and age too, it's like everything is like what just happened too, kind of in your mind. So like, do you think that played any part in that?
That absolutely did, but that's also that's the risk you do with any heavyweight fight. It's either going to end in a highlight reel finish, or it's going to be a decision. There's only one decision that I can think of that's a heavyweight fight that was fun, and that was Bigfoot and Mark Hunt, right? And wasn't Bigfoot on steroids in that fight? Like, it's crazy. So it's to expect anything different. I don't think people were expecting Blaydes to go out there and like finish Volkov in the first round, or vice versa. I don't think people were expecting Volkov to knock out Curtis Blaydes early on. So you're going to get a decision, and of course, comparing that to the featherweight fight, which also went the decision. But it's just more action-packed. The guys are more mobile. You just don't see those types of fights at heavyweight. So I just think, it was a combination of both.
For sure. For what stood out to me, I'll just throw this out there. I thought, Bilal Muhammad looked good. He's on a 3-fight win streak now. Tisha Torres obviously looked great. Lauren Murphy, I mean, she's starting to put a little bit of a run together. Maybe we can see her get crushed by Valentina soon. That could be exciting for the division. Good performance. Jillian Robertson looked great. And Mr. Jim Miller, I guess everybody's talking about the Hall of Fame, beating a top prospect like Roberts. I mean, some good little individual performances. Obviously, you got shouted out the co-main event, which was great. I mean, Josh Emmett tore every muscle you can think of and still went out there, gets a 10-8 round. So, I mean, some good fights, some good individual performances out there.
And how about the Canadians, by the way? I got to point out 2 Canadians won on the card, Jillian Robertson and Marc-Andre Barrios. So that was good to see, because there's like no Canadians in the UFC right now. It's terrible.
Well, Jillian Robertson, to be fair, I mean, do you guys claim her, or is it like
we'll claim her? I'm looking at Tapology right now. They got the flag next to her. It's we'll claim her. I mean, obviously I think she was raised in Florida. She's from, I believe, Niagara Falls originally, but you know what? We'll take it. And she's got the red hair, right? That's not for the US, it's for Canada. So, to me, it's you got to build those Canadians up, because again, once everything resumes, they're going to go back to the Canadian cities, and you need to have fighters. And there's just been so many that haven't panned out over the last couple of years. Like, you think of the days when we had George St. Pierre and guys like Sam Stout, really standout Canadians. There just isn't that anymore. I mean, it's slim pickings. So they see the Canadians win is good for the sport.
Listen, Jillian Robertson, one last thing about her, though. I believe she did an interview with Mr. Lynch on Sports where she mentioned her parents were from Scotland. So, I mean, I hate to try to take her away from Canada, but
where is she born, though, Lucas? Where was she born? We
want to start getting into the specifics of where people were
born.
Let me ask you this.
Hold on, but let me ask you this. Do you consider yourself American or French?
Well, I was born in France, raised in America. So if I'm in France, everybody says I'm an American. If I'm in America, everybody says I'm French. So I don't get to be from anywhere. But that's try, though. I like where your head's at.
Yeah, I would call you French. I mean, yeah, you live there
French
now.
Passport, so yeah.
There you go. You're French. That's something unique. If you said I'm American, you're with everyone else in America. Like, it's not a big deal. But you say, oh, you're from France. That's kind of like a cool conversation starter, right? So I would run with that, Lucas, if I were you.
So I got a choice. I have the passport, a green card. So even America doesn't quite want me. But I'm gonna make my way back there. They will not keep me out of those borders.
Yes, there you go.
And I think for me, just stand out, and Lucas already kind of touched on it, and it just so happens that he's also from the same state as me. But Jim Miller, he really stood out to me too, because I felt like he wasn't supposed to really win that fight too. Roosevelt Roberts was coming in. He just, I think he had a 2-fight win streak, but just recently had a win. So that was still kind of fresh in everyone's mind. So I thought for Jim to go in there and kind of have a classic Miller fight where he just goes in there and is able to submit a guy, that to me, I thought that stood out among some of the other performances on that.
Certainly did. And it definitely derailed. I mean, Roosevelt Roberts, obviously the UFC wanted him to win. He was a young guy. He's, obviously got a good record and stuff, but Jim Miller's dangerous for anyone, even at his age. I mean, he's a guy that you can put in any fight and you're going to get nothing but action. And he's a guy that has won some interesting fights here. So to me, that was another really good feel-good story. And don't make Jim Miller the underdog, otherwise he might win.
Yeah. And another thing I want to talk about too is they just recently announced that UFC Contender Series is going to be happening. Not exactly when they thought it would be, but I believe August 4th is the date. And with some of these guys too, I think they even said Max was supposed to be a guy that was going to be on a Contender Series card too. So what do you guys just kind of make of the Contender Series too? And do you think we'll be seeing maybe even them kind of pulling guys like we were saying before too, maybe these younger guys now back to the Contender Series other than to these bigger UFC cards?
Lucas, you want to go? I interrupted you last time, so you can go ahead.
No, of course. I mean, no, you got to be the guest, got to be first. But if you're passing the baton to me, I will take it. Listen, I had a journalist come to me listen, I'm trying to make something for the prospects. Can you give me some names? Literally every time I thought of a prospect, he was getting signed to the UFC. He was guys who should go to the UFC. They're all getting plucked. Literally everybody. I was like, all right, let me try to go to Australia or something. Honestly, I'm just kind of worried about who they're going to have on there. I saw some names get signed. I believe it was TJ Laramie, a Canadian like yourself. It was about damn time. I even told him on Twitter, but it was about time for him. Anthony Romero as well. Great signing as well. So it looks like they're getting some guys, but I'm worried that it's going to be watered down a little bit compared to the past card. Look at the first season. And then I feel like every season it's not quite the same. So I'm worried we're going to get another The Ultimate Fighter situation. But, I mean, listen, some guys have to go through the Contender Series. It's important for these prospects. It's a great way to sort of build your name. So I'm excited for it. I just hope it's not too watered down with some of the signings that we're seeing in the UFC.
Yeah, and to kind of go off your point there, Connor, talking about the Contender Series guys like Brandon Royval, for example, he was signed to the UFC to fight Tim Elliott when he was supposed to fight on Contender Series. So you are seeing that where they, as far as fighters on standby, they're picking guys off Contender Series that were already supposed to be booked earlier in the year. So I think you're going to continue to see that, which it's a risk. And Royval's a guy that was more than ready for the UFC, so that was fine. But a guy like Max with only 5 fights, I think that was a little risky. And obviously we saw what happened in that fight. But no, I mean I love Contender Series. It's a good glimpse into the future. I mean, the UFC is one of those sports where, unfortunately, because there's the entertainment aspect of it, you don't see a lot of focus on the prospects. Like you look at football or basketball, like the NCAA is like a huge, business, and people definitely tune into that. NHL, we have the World Juniors. Like there's a lot of really interesting things there. But with MMA, it's not really as highlighted as much. So Contender Series is about the closest thing we'll get to that. And I think it's a good glimpse into talent from everywhere. And glad to see, like you said, 2 Canadians on there on the show, because I believe the first Canadian ever was either Teddy Ash or Aaron Jeffrey. I can't remember, but they were on there last year. So it just goes to show you that they need some more Canadians. Like I've kind of been getting at here. If you guys haven't noticed here, I might as well wear a red shirt next time. I've been talking so much about Canada.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm like most interested in seeing too is the fact that if they just bring a lot of guys that we've almost like seen on Contender Series before, but maybe they did get a win, but like didn't get signed too. Like I know we're seeing like I just wrote an article about Josh Parisian. Like they're bringing him back. He obviously was on Contender Series. I think Greg Rebello he beat, and then was on the Ultimate Fighter. But we're seeing him back, so I'm wondering if that might be like a trend too. We might see.
Well, I know that in general they've done that before. Like Chase Sherman was supposed to be on the Contender Series back when the UFC cut him. So I think they want to mix, and I think that's smart, by the way. Get guys in there as like redemption stories. Get fighters that maybe didn't pan out. Like I wonder if Arosa was a guy they considered putting on the Contender Series as well, just because he lost as well too. So I mean, I think that's good because like I said, not a lot of people know these prospects unless you watch LFA or some of the other promotions. So to have like some UFC vets in there, some fighters that maybe have been around for a while that are waiting for an opportunity, I think it's a good mix. As far as that goes, because that'll be more, it makes just the fights more intriguing because there's more on the line.
Mm-hmm. And obviously this weekend too, we have UFC on ESPN 12. What are you guys looking forward to most? And I'll help us out this time. Lucas, if you want to go first for this one.
Refresh me real quick. Who's on the card? I know Mike Perry's on. Oh yeah. Here we go. Here's the fight I was looking forward to. Kama Worthy versus Luis Pena. Give me all the Worthy Pena. I want all of that fight. That is an amazing fight. Like the more I think about it, the more I like it. Obviously, the main event's great. People don't need me to harp on that one. It's great. We know that. But just that fight itself, oh, man, I like it so much. It's going to be good. I hate that one of these sort of when they're in the UFC, I don't like using the term prospect. With sort of these up-and-comers, knowing that one's going to lose, that's kind of tough. But, man, I love that fight. Mike Perry and his girlfriend, I really want to see how that goes. That's a pretty safe fight for me in terms of trying something like that. But I'm a little bit intrigued. But, yeah, so some good cards some good fights sprinkled on the card.
Yeah, for me, there's a couple good fights. I like this Jordan Griffin and Yusuf Zalal fight that was booked sort of at the last minute here. 2 really promising featherweights. Griffin more of a vet. Zalal still very young, but comes from a good camp at Factory X. I love the what was the other fight? This Brendan Allen and Kyle Dawkins fight. This fight is going to be awesome. I'm glad this is on the main card. Brendan Allen has looked great since coming over from LFA and obviously beating Kevin Holland and beating Tom Breeze in his last fight. And Kyle Dawkins, I mean, he's a guy that is battle tested and has been ready for the UFC. So interesting matchup. It was supposed to be Ian Heinisch, and Dawkins, in my opinion, is a great call-up. Of course, he won in the Contender Series already, so he has that UFC Apex experience, so that'll be exciting. But yeah, this is a pretty good card overall. Not like, not flashy, not like a ton of huge names, but I think overall there's a lot of fun matchups that could have good implications for their respective divisions.
Yeah. And I agree with that Dawkins fight too, because like it's kind of like what we were just talking about too. It's a guy that had already won on Contender Series, just didn't get the contract. But also too, he's not like one of those guys that was just like got that and then kind of sat there and then got picked up anyway. It's like he's already he had more fights. He did get more tested, so I think that's gonna be interesting too. And I am interested in the Mike Perry fight. Basically, just I like Mickey Gall too, but just like with Perry, it's just like. That could be any fighter with that story of just like bringing your girlfriend in. It makes me think of like Diego Sanchez when he kind of had like a mentor there too. I feel like it's a little different than this, but when you have something like that, like kind of a story like that, I think you almost have to pay attention to it.
But doesn't it make the fight more intriguing? Like if you look at this fight on paper, Mike Perry has a lot of advantages, especially if it stays standing, right? Like I think he's got better knockout power than Mickey. And obviously if he can stay off the ground, it gets really interesting. But now with this corner thing, like if Mickey Gall gets out of the first round, like how interesting will that be if let's say Gall's, doing well, if Mike Perry is getting adjustments from a girl that doesn't have a lot of experience. And by the way, just so we don't get called misogynist, it could be a guy in his corner with no experience either. It doesn't matter. We're not singling out the female aspect of it. We're singling out the lack of experience. So this actually makes the fight more intriguing. And the other thing is like Mickey Gall is a pretty personable guy. Mike Perry's like crazy. So just the mix of that should be kind of interesting to see how that fight unfolds. It's actually a pretty intriguing fight. Co-main event though, not really sold on it being a co-main event, but I'll take it. I'll watch it.
Yeah, I feel like go ahead, Lucas.
No, I was going to say about the last thing about the kind of the Perry fight is that he mentioned recently, I don't know if it was an interview with Arrow, who it was, she's not actually going to be like telling them what to do, which we should be thankful for. Apparently, she's just kind of like a decoration. You get a front row seat, enjoy the fights. I've heard him. I mean, we all know that famous interview where he's talking about his corner, like faint, and he just turns around like, shut up. I think he was getting tired of having, the corner telling him what to do. And it makes me think of that Anthony Smith fighting against Glover where they were shouting instructions super specific constantly. And I think Mike Perry's one of those guys who he needs the space. He needs you to back up. But like you mentioned, James, it's going to be interesting because say he starts to lose this fight. I don't think he will. I mean, Gall doesn't quite have the experience. But if he does and he needs to start relying on his corner, things are going to get interesting.
Certainly will.
I feel like most fight fans too always wish that the fight gets finished quickly. For this one, I mean, I think you want to see at least go to the second round just so you can kind of see that interaction.
Of course, yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. And then one more fighter I'm kind of looking out for too, and I know we kind of talked about it. Maybe it is kind of a mismatch, but Sean Woodson, Jillian Robertson. The reason I'm looking at that is just when you have a guy like Woodson who's 6'2.5" or something at featherweight. I mean, just like anytime you have somebody. Like almost like a specimen at that weight class, like that's someone I always kind of want to tune in just to watch because I think there's something there.
No, I agree. Woodson, if he can continue making this weight, his frame is going to be a problem here. Like how many 6'2" featherweights do you know? It's just pretty insane that's happening. I do see this is a featherweight fight. I figured it was going to be 150. Well, I don't know if Tapology has that wrong. I'm pretty sure it's a catch weight of 150. But either way, Sean Woodson is going to have a huge height and reach advantage in this fight. Like Arosa's, he's 6 feet with 74.5 inch reach, whereas Woodson's 6'2" with the 79 inch reach. So he's got a big reach advantage in this fight. But Arosa has the experience. He's been on Ultimate Fighter. He's been on Contender Series. So he's a guy that has way more experience than Woodson, but I think talent-wise, Woodson should be favored here, just in terms of what he was able to do in his last fight against Kyle Bochniak. But I agree, very interesting matchup.
Yeah, I do wonder like where that fight will be too, because I did talk to Woodson before this fight, but he was still scheduled to fight Nelson. And he said the only reason they were fighting at 150 was because of Nelson. Nelson was the one that was like pushing for it, because Woodson sounded very convincing that he could make the weight at 145, no problem.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So yeah, we'll see what, I guess we'll find out at the weigh-ins, or we'll find out soon. But yeah, like I'm looking on Tapology here, they have it at 145, but I could have sworn I saw something about it being a 150 catch weight, unless I just made that up and I'm losing my marbles, but that wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah. And we'll start with James too. The final topic here too. What do you make of this headliner on this Saturday?
Oh, it's a great fight. I think it's a lot of implications here. I think the UFC would like Dan Hooker to win this fight, just with the fact that, he's a city kickboxing guy. They can kind of sell that angle of him being Izzy's teammate. And, he obviously headlined the Auckland card earlier this year. It makes more sense for the UFC to push him. And plus there's fresh matchups if he wins this fight. Now, if Poirier wins, he's got to hope that Justin Gaethje beats Khabib, because then that's an automatic title fight for him. He already holds the win over Gaethje. Mm-hmm. But if Khabib beats Justin Gaethje, then Poirier is kind of in that Curtis Blaydes land where, he's lost already. They're not going to do that rematch right away. I guess Tony Ferguson's still out there. You've got Oliveira, but there's a lot of it would be a lot more complicated going forward if Dustin Poirier wins. I still think he is going to win on Saturday. I think he will be able to get in on the inside and potentially either knock out Dan Hooker or just outstrike him. But it's a very intriguing fight and good headliner for a fight night card. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I love a great fight, great matchup. I love seeing Poirier sort of fight these other names in the division. Dan Hooker, I'm always intrigued to see where his ceiling is. I mean, to be honest, the Edson Barboza fight, it kind of scares me whenever he faces like a good striker, because I think back to that fight and it's like, is he, obviously we know he can take the damage. He's not a marshmallow like you mentioned, but it does worry me in terms of facing these big strikers. But listen, great test for Hooker, figure out where he's at in the division. Great fight for Dustin Poirier to sort of figure out, right, is he going to be a gatekeeper or is he still a viable contender? So obviously I don't have to try to sell this one too much. If we get this great striking matchup like we're expecting, it's going to be awesome. If we get sort of like the Blaydes fight, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Yeah. And James, before we let you go too, I mean, that's kind of the end of the show here. For you, any final statements?
Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun. Hope to do it again. Your listeners can follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports, and same thing on Instagram. That's where I post all my content. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, guys. Really appreciate being part of the first episode. We're making history here.
And we are. Yeah, I mean, me and Lucas, you were definitely one of the first people that we wanted to have on the show too, just because, like we kind of talked about in the beginning, like not even just like what you do for the score and for journalism, but just trying to helping the smaller guys and just kind of helping everyone become better at what they do, kind of perfect that craft. So, and I think like you always say too, it's about the reps. So, yeah, that's very important. And I just want to also too, guys, James kind of plugged his social media there too. You can follow us as well at Deep Water MMA Podcast on Instagram, and also Deep_MMA at Twitter, and also our Deep Water MMA Podcast page on Facebook as well. So we got the little trio there. Anything before we go, Lucas?
Yes. Follow me on social media, Grandsire MMA, Twitter, Instagram. Please subscribe to me on YouTube. Like, things are starting to, move up a little bit. It's just Lucas Grandsire. Very simple. I even got a logo done and everything. So listen, please subscribe to the YouTube. That's the big one. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. James, thank you so much for coming on. Connor was like, have you ever talked to James Lynch? Have I talked to James? Come on, man. So for sure, man, we had to have you on. Rectify the fact that you were like the 10th guest on the debate show. So, had to have you first.
All
so
good, man. Save the best for last, right? So there you go.
There we go.
And there you go. And one more big thanks to Miami News, too, for helping us do this as well. Thank you, Eric. And we'll see you guys next week for another show of the Deep Water MMA Podcast. Thanks, guys.